provide evidence. You let me know when we are.
Are we now? Is it on? It's not trained on.
We've got that one over there, the one behind us.
Okay, all right, it's that one. Yeah, fine. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'm going to start by making the practical points about the facilities. I'm being asked to move my microphone closer. Is that better? Okay, thank you. In the event of fire, which we hope will happen, we are not planning a fire today. The exits are that way and that way, I'm told. Apologies for absence then. We've had apologies, I believe, from Councillor Rippeth, who's substituted by Councillor Fain today, and we have apologies from Councillor Michael Atkins, who has no substitute today. So we are one member down, but still quorate. Can I ask whether anybody has any declarations of interest in any matters on the agenda today? No, thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting of the 26th of July. Are people happy for us to accept those as an accurate record of the meeting? Thank you. Public questions, we have received none. Overview and scrutiny arrangements is our next item at item 5, so I'll hand over to Robert Fox. Robert, I should have said, is here in place of our scrutiny officer, who is on leave, and we have our monitoring officer, Robert Parkin, replacing the deputy monitoring officer, who is also on leave. So, Robert Fox, if I can leave you to introduce this item.
Yes, so members, good morning. As you're aware, the CFGS has been undertaking a review for some time now on the scrutiny arrangements within the Combined Authority. The report you received, which is to note and also take comments from you, is an update on the progress and the milestones as far as the review is concerned. I don't think really there's much more to add at this point.
Thank you very much. I'm looking for anybody who wishes to say something on this, and I'm seeing Councillor Sharp to start off with.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points, or about 3 or 4. And I've spent a while over the weekend looking at the way other combined authorities operate, and as an aside, we're not alone in struggling at although we've always managed to be quorate, is certainly looking at there are certainly 2 combined authorities that have had meetings that were held but were actually in quorate. So I understand that's an issue that's obviously happening around the country. The major concern I have is this thing about and we've discussed in the pre-meet, and obviously we're going to discuss probably later with our work arrangements, around understanding or trying to get an idea of the Mayor's priorities and his plan and what he's bringing forward, is the stopping of scrutiny looking at the board agendas. Certainly September seems, in my opinion, too early, as we're at a stage where I don't think we totally understand what the plans are, and so therefore that would be one that I would want to push back to later in the year, and then it may be that we look at it then, and if things, the papers are coming forward, we're getting access to the papers a lot earlier and are able to comment on them, then it may be something we say yes, that will be well and done. I notice in terms of the paper that Robert's referred to in terms of the task and finish groups, that looks like that's going to be ongoing from September, because I think we need to get up and running on those sort of things. And the last point is really about, and I'm not sure I'll pronounce it properly, but rapporteurs, or whatever we want to call them, is lead members. And I know the paper that Ed gave with us, which was about specific work meeting by meeting, and I'm looking at my notes or the paper he presented, be tasked to carry out specific work meeting by the committee. And in some ways, and I'm sure he's going to talk on it in a minute, Councillor Bagent has given us a list of things that he's looking at, which in my mind is what the way the rapporteur or lead member should operate, rather than a specific one by one. So those are my areas of concern as we are at on the committee on Ed's comments.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other comments on this? Councillor Coles.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I suppose I'm reflecting back on being a lead member for a particular area which doesn't appear to really have much focus at the moment, and as we go forward, looking at the forward plan, the Skills Committee meets on the 13th of September, and there are no papers published yet, although there's quite a busy schedule with some 6 items to be discussed. I'm not entirely clear how the new structure will enable us to get more information more quickly in particular areas we're interested in, and whether we need to format our process so that we're having a particular meeting about a particular subject when clearly throughout the year things will change and wax and wane, and we might need to bring them forward at any stage. So I'm a little bit confused about how we formulate that. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? I had a question. There's an implicit question at the bottom of page 13 on the last item on that table, which is work by the monitoring officer and others to consider how scrutiny can productively be engaged in the ongoing governance of SPVs, special purpose vehicles. And there is an implicit question there that there's an item going to audit and governance in September, and an informal workshop for overview and scrutiny could be held in October or November to discuss this. Would you be wanting to have an informal workshop on governance of SPVs and the involvement of scrutiny in that? Would that be useful? Councillor Coles.
Chair, yes, if I may, I'm guessing these are SPVs to do with housing developments and that's the process of bringing work forward, or are we talking about quite a broad scheme?
I think the previous SPVs we were looking at were to do with the now defunct CAM. Whether there will be SPVs that will be involved in whatever replaces CAM, I don't think we yet know. I think there's a more general point, though, about scrutiny of vehicles that are not the board or its committees. I don't know whether Robert Parkin can help us.
Yep. So, Chair, so the Combined Authority does deliver a number of its projects through the use of special purpose vehicles or companies, and it does so in an array of ways, either as a controller of a business plan and involvement in the board. So in the context of the CAM project, that was the model. The housing area is similar, but there are also other areas of the organisation's business that are delivered through companies such as, for example, the University of Peterborough. The Business Growth Service is another part around the skills agenda and an economic development agenda that again is delivered. So it's a sort of tranche and slice of the organisation's activity, and I think what we wanted to do was to create a framework, certainly with audit, but clearly with overview and scrutiny, because we need to match the areas properly, so that this committee could be clear on where its interventions lie and when, and correspondingly for audit, how the overall framework works. So, and that's where we're at the moment. I think into the future, it's entirely possible that further SPVs are created or companies are delivered through. So again, it's as I think has been earlier stated, it's about setting up the framework and being clear about the terms of reference for this committee about how you want to engage with it and how that fits with the legislation on scrutiny.
Councillor Davey.
I'm happy to be corrected by Robert, but I would have thought our role isn't about the governance of process, but it's about what goes on the committees when they're up and running. So it's how we as a scrutiny committee can look at the agendas that these particular SPVs are undertaking, and it's about how we can then scrutinise their activity rather than the governance of the process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the overall picture is important. So clearly for audit and governance, they'll be interested in the overall scheme. And for this committee, in my mind, and I think your engagement on this is clearly going to be crucial to where we go to with it. It's how what goes before those companies, but also when the intervention lies. You know, what you're calling in and when, but then thinking more sort of panoramically in terms of the CFGS work is how can you get upstream? If there is work that's going to the companies to be delivered, when can this committee do its early scrutiny intervention in the context of a slightly more circuitous route to delivery? So it's two things. It's the direct call-in stuff, when should that come, but then it's the upstream work as well. And just very quickly to tack that on, it's something that local authorities grapple with. Members will be aware of specific interventions in different local authority settings. Croydon, for example, Nottingham. There's been a lot of work and actually some informal non-statutory interventions from MHCLG where they've looked at how problems have arisen, and I think part of the answer is to ensure that committees such as this are empowered, engaged and clear in terms of when they can involve themselves and agitate, ask questions in the right way to get to that overall outcome of good governance.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, touching on the SPVs, I mean, we did have a big issue with the CAM where we weren't getting access to a lot of information on that. So certainly a session looking at how, if there are going to be those set up in the future, how that would work would certainly be useful, I would have thought. So yes, happy to sort of agree to that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Miscandlin.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think it's important that we do have these papers issued to us, even in draft form beforehand, so that when they get to these companies to deal with them, that we have got some knowledge of it. To go in blind and try and discuss something is very, very tiresome and very, very not very good for the people to understand it. You have to have information beforehand, and if you have a briefing beforehand, even 3 weeks on a draft copy, that you understand where it's going and what it's doing, I think is important that every member of this committee understands what's happening, and when we come to discuss it at committee, that we know what's going on. I think that's very important.
Okay. So is there a view about whether or not you would like that informal workshop on the role of overview and scrutiny in SPVs in October, November? Councillor Goldsack.
I don't know whether I'm in a minority here, but quite keen to do it, quite keen to learn. Is the virtual world dead now? Would it not be more cost effective and quick for us to do it virtually?
I was assuming that would be a virtual event because it's not a decision-making event. So I don't see any need to drag people halfway across the county to attend something physically and in person. So I'd be more than delighted to do that virtually. Shall we aim to set that up then and send a poll round for some date in October, November to have that conversation? Okay. Before I come back to Robert to pick up on a couple of things, the other point I wanted to make was that I'm particularly concerned, given that we've had concerns expressed anyway about the end to regular sharing and scrutiny of mayoral decisions at committee, as in the cell of the table on page 12. I'm particularly concerned that at the board meeting on Wednesday, 3 of the 4 substantive items of business there are done under general exception notices, which means that they have not afforded us the 28 days notice of the intention to take a key decision. One of those in particular relates to whether or not to expend an amount of capital money on the purchase of a freehold building. it seems to me that we cannot, on the one hand, have the vast majority of business of the board at any one of its meetings being carried out without the required notice. It's a general exception notice is a way to get round that, but we shouldn't be seeing short notice items as being the major part of the board's work. And if there are short notice items taken under general exception notice provisions, then they ought to be notified in such a time that we have an opportunity to call officers in front of us to talk about those issues if we need to. And certainly we need to retain, it seems to me, the right to ask questions at the board about those general exception notice items. So I'm looking for your support for that as a principle, and I'm asking that you authorise your Vice Chairman and myself to work with officers behind the scenes to come forward with some way of ensuring that that isn't the way things are normally done, and that we have rights to call people in front of us in a timely manner and in time, not with less than 5 days' notice. I was told when I wanted to call the Chief Executive here to discuss that item about the accommodation on the same day as the general exception notice was published, I was told that it was too late because 5 days' notice was required. That's not acceptable, and I would like your support for Councillor Sharp and myself to work with officers on a better way of doing business. Councillor Miscandlin.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Madam Chairman. The principle of buying a property takes time, and we all know that. You can't do it in 5 days, not unless you're very, very rich or very, very important. This obviously has been hanging around for some time, so therefore it should have been brought forward to us a lot sooner than what it has been. And to be told it's past the exemption date, to me, is unacceptable. And I think that question should be asked and answered.
Yep. Okay. Thank you very much. Can I come back to Robert then on the two specific issues that were raised? There was the one about holding back the rapporteur's item, if I understand it correctly. No, I'm sorry, I'm misunderstanding you.
No, it was two items. One was about the date of the not having any access, partly because of the issue you've raised, not having a ability to scrutinise the committee agendas as of next month, basically, which seems to me to be a lot earlier. And my proposal would be that we push that back to maybe the end of December and then see how we're going, because we're changing things very dramatically, and now I think we're all here to do a job in terms of try to scrutinise and ask the right questions and critically challenge the Mayor. So I feel to change a number of things like that, especially the stopping of scrutiny of the mayoral decisions at committee, would be wrong. My second point about the rapporteur was the definition that Ed had put in his notes, which was the rapporteur was carried out items on a specific work meeting by meeting basis, and I don't think that, to my opinion, works. And I used Councillor Bajent's very paper that he circulated as an example of where that isn't working. It's working the way I would expect the lead member, rapporteur, or whatever we call them, to work. And I don't know how other members feel on that, but those are my two comments, really.
Okay, thank you. I mean, just on the first point about scrutiny of mayoral decisions, my understanding is that if we were no longer to have the power to scrutinise mayoral decisions, that would require a change to the Constitution, and I don't think a change to the Constitution has been proposed yet. So I would hope that would be. I will seek to ensure, not hope. I will seek to ensure that the Constitution change that would require would not be enacted, and I think putting that off till December would be a good idea to see how it works, particularly because of the general exception notices. The other issue was from Councillor Coles about fluctuating
If I may, it's long-term
items.
things that take more than 1 month to resolve. So,
Yeah.
we've got 6 coming up in September. There may be other items coming. It's very similar to Councillor Bajan's response in terms of transport, indeed.
Okay. Have you got any guidance for us on that, Robert?
Effectively, the report you received today and the update, these are recommendations from the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny. They are for you as a committee to chew over, mull over, and agree or not agree as appropriate. So, I mean, what you're receiving today is an update. Obviously, there'll be another update next month, and obviously anything that the committee feels that either needs expanding upon or some more information, particularly around the rapporteurs, and some work could be done internally between officers at the Combined Authority and Ed Hammond to kind of work up that rapporteur role into something more meaningful. And we just take them forward from there.
Okay, thank you. Robert?
Thank you. Just very quickly, just so 2 points. Mr. Fox is absolutely right. These are recommendations. The piece about mayoral decisions somehow being suspended from this committee's work, the legislation wouldn't allow for that. This committee is able to call in matters and to call the mayor, like any other member or officer, to come to this committee to account. That's very important. That members of this committee are aware of that. It's a very significant and an important measure of control over the activity of the organisation and proper scrutiny. So just wanted to convey those 2 points. These are recommendations. The timing of their implementation needs to fit with the way that you feel the committee is working with that forward plan and with the decision-making process. And then the separate bit was by no means do any of these suggestions somehow limit the power of this committee, which is wide and wouldn't be limited even by that change of the constitution, because some of these rules are derived from the fundamental legislation which empowers this committee.
Councillor Sharp?
Very briefly, sorry to labour the point. I mean, my concern came from, and it's page 12 on the agenda, where it actually says an end to the regular sharing and scrutiny of mayoral decisions at committee. So that's where I'm coming from, that it's there in black and white. But the other thing as well was the paper mentions that these recommendations are going to the board on Wednesday, and I was just concerned we were going to end up with something that basically, as I've just quoted from page 12, was going to be, a fait accompli, and that's really my concern.
Right. Okay.
Just to say that the recommendations of the CFGS review are actually not going to CA board until September.
Indeed, yes. Councillor van der Weyer?
Yeah, the main gist of the CFGS recommendations is that we move from scrutiny of mayoral decisions 2 days before they're made to this broader, more in-depth scrutiny, which I entirely support. But that doesn't mean we should abandon the option of the mayoral scrutiny, and I think we should sort of retain that explicitly as an option to have, rather than sort of letting it be there, sort of existing in our back pocket because of legislation.
I think that's right. I mean, I think from what I'm hearing today, the elements of concern that we are expressing about this are firstly that the suggestion that there should be an end to our ability to scrutinise mayoral decisions, firstly is not in accord with the legislation. We need to retain our legislative rights. We also need to ensure that there is opportunity to scrutinise mayoral decisions when necessary, and particularly when they are sprung on us through general exception notices, and that's a particular concern, and that we will be wanting to seek a way of ensuring that doesn't happen to us, and that we have adequate opportunity to have people in front of us to explain short-term items like that, and also to be able to ensure that business is put on agendas of the board and of its committees in an orderly way, and not in a way like this. So there's some work to be done with officers behind the scenes on that point, and also that we want a bit of clarity about the comparative roles of lead members and rapporteurs. Those are the things we're keeping coming back to. And so I'm suggesting that, and there was a suggestion about moving that end of the mayoral decision-making scrutiny to taking that away from the 27th of September and moving it to later in the year. I'm inclined to agree with that, so that we've got time to work that out. And if it's coming to the board at the end of September, then we have our meeting at the end of next month to put some of our own commentary around that report, and be very clear about the things we want to change and the things we don't want to change, having had those conversations about scrutiny and general exception notices and so on behind the scenes. Are we okay with that? Is that a sensible way to proceed? Yeah. Okay. Grand. I think we're done on that item then. I think we've noted that. Next, go on to item 6, which is actually item 7 according to the first page of the paper, but I'm assured it is item 6, and it appears as such in the agenda, which is to ask the committee to discuss and make suggestions on our own work programme. So, Robert, do you have an introduction on this for us?
Yes, the report highlights the fact that the chair and vice chair of this committee met with the mayor earlier this month to get a sense of the mayor's emerging priorities. You'll see from the report there were 4 particular areas that were highlighted by the mayor, i.e. climate change, public health, financial fairness, and a measure of the compassion in the mayor's policies. And the report does say that the committee is asked to consider these 4 themes when considering their work programme. The report also highlights a few areas of guidance from the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny. I was giving them their old name there. And also suggests that the committee should consider how it understands the benefits scrutiny would bring to a particular issue, how best it would be carried out, how best the scrutiny review would be carried out, what would be the best outcome of the work, and how does the work engage with the activity of the executive and other decision makers, including partners. To that end, what I am going to suggest is next month bringing a document to the committee that is essentially a scoping document, which will enable the committee to bring some rigour and value to any scrutiny reviews by suggesting what the rationale behind a suggested review is, and with the key outcomes at the end of a review being, if I could just move my mouse, it would really help. There we go. So enabling the committee to understand the role overview and scrutiny is performing in a particular review, what factors would tell you whether what a good review should actually look like in terms of that particular scrutiny topic, what the potential outcomes are of any review, so service improvements, policy review or change, etc., and the value that scrutiny is actually bringing to that review. So it just enables some area of focus, and the idea would be that members could bring a particular item to the committee that they wish to review. But if they focused on the particular scoping document and understanding those areas that I was just highlighting there, and working perhaps with the scrutiny officer, who's not here today, so I'm sort of planting something on her, to develop that, and then they can always be brought to meetings to discuss and enable a sharing of views and an understanding of indeed whether or not a review should be a task and finish group, or whether it should be a full committee over 1 meeting, 2 meetings, who you should invite to give evidence at a particular review, and what resources indeed are required for that review. You know, resources are not infinite rather, and you know, some understanding of the legal, financial and equality and diversity implications of a particular review should be understood as well. So the idea, as I say, is to bring something to this meeting next month, for you to cogitate over.
Right. Thank you very much indeed. I'm sure we're all very good at cogitating. So, Councillor van der Weyer.
Yes, thank you very much. It's good that we've, I think, started that process of identifying the Mayor's priorities. I think there's still some work to be done yet with the Mayor so that we can then convert them into subjects that we can study as topics as scrutiny and identify outcomes in the way that Robert Fox has just been discussing. So that might be something that we can sort of a specific thing we can talk about with the Mayor when he comes for the mayoral question time. To sort of tease out some of those priorities and how we can use them. In terms of actual things to be looking at now, I think there's some urgency about looking at the process for the local transport plan, which was discussed at the last board, there's clearly some work going on that within the combined authority and with partners on how the local transport plan refresh is going to happen. I think there's an opportunity now, just in the next sort of 2-3 months, for us to do some work on that, ensuring that the process for doing that is robust and does bring in all the parties that are needed and considers everything that it should do. So if we're as we progress to actually selecting topics, I would like to propose that as one that we look at with some urgency.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Davey.
Yeah, forgive me if this is covered in the pre-meeting, but in the report that's prepared for our cogitating, can there be greater clarity about what the Mayor's priorities are with the 4 things he refers to in item 2.3? They all could mean an awful lot of things and a lot of different things to all of us sitting within the room. And whilst I welcome compassion, I'm not clear I understand how I would want to look at that within the scope of any particular review that takes place. I also would argue that I spent a lot of time as an officer looking at financial fairness in the distribution of funds across the combined authority, and it takes an awful long time to understand what that might mean, because there's ways in which you can manage that. So you can either look at it through actual population or through deprivation or through a range of different topics, vulnerabilities, through rurality. But I would welcome in the cogitating paper some clarity about what that might mean, because therefore that would affect how we would conduct our business. Climate change, again, means different things, I think, to different people. So whilst I welcome all 4 of these things here and understand why the Mayor's done it, greater clarity would be welcome. Thank you ever so much, Chair.
I think we would all welcome greater clarity about the Mayor's priorities. Councillor Davey, Councillor Hay and then Councillor Coles.
Thank you, Chair. In actual fact, Councillor Davies covered a lot of what I was about to say. I find this paper too woolly. I'm still no further clarity on what the Mayor's actual priorities are. There's no mention of transport, there's no mention of housing, there's no mention of skills. Is he saying that none of those are within his top 4 priorities?
Thank you. Councillor Coles.
Yeah, forgive me, Chair. I feel like I'm going down a rabbit hole, but clearly, as Councillor Hay has said, we know what the responsibility of the combined authority is, and that's to provide some strength in terms of transport, housing, and skills across all of the constituent authorities. So we know that's the role. We don't know quite how that's going to be delivered and how we can contribute to it. And to add subjects like climate change, which, or for that matter, public health, which are very broad subjects which go far beyond the bounds of our individual councils or the combined authority itself, is somewhat unusual, but fair enough, it's there. Financial fairness, we've always focused on making sure our own areas are adequately provided for. That's always been a subject that members talk about, but then are you going to start putting a layer on that which says, for example, you're having to spend a certain amount of money in one area to actually deliver what's proposed, so you ought to cut that back a bit so that someone else gets a bit more money. So it doesn't make a huge amount of sense to me. I'm sorry to say that, but it doesn't. And I'd love to measure compassion. I'd love to see an example of where compassion is measured that makes any sense at all. But to me, it sounds like fine words, but very little in terms of detail. So you'll excuse me if I'm somewhat sceptical. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Bagent.
Thank you, Chair. On these 4 topics, I'm sure that you questioned the Mayor at length about his topics. Perhaps you could give a little bit more of explanation about what he actually said. I mean, it's very bland on the agenda, but I wonder if you could spell that out a bit more, please.
I'm feeling that we are being asked to take responsibility as your chair and vice chair for what the Mayor said. I have to say we have to work with what the Mayor said, and that is what the Mayor said. I'll hand over to Councillor Sharp in a moment for his cogitations, word of the day on this. On climate change, I do think there is a remit for the Mayor to consider climate change, and for us, therefore, to consider how the Mayor and the Combined Authority are considering climate change. The decision was taken by the Mayor and the Board to adopt the recommendations, the interim recommendations of the Climate Change Commission, which was set up by the Combined Authority. There will be more of that. We're looking at November, for end of November, for some final recommendations going to the board, and I think that there is a remit for us in asking questions and contributing to that agenda. It's as you say, Councillor Coles, it is more than the sum of all of us put together, but that doesn't mean that we don't have responsibilities, and that those recommendations from the Commission aren't recommendations for the Combined Authority to take on. There's also, to be fair, a whole world of questions that can be asked and discussions that can be had about the activities of the Combined Authority itself and its contribution to climate change. And what is the climate contribution of its travel and transport policies? What is the climate change impact of the building it promotes and the structures it undertakes? I mean, the Peterborough station, I think, is a case in point there in terms of its climate impact. So I think there is work to be done. Is it doing shadow carbon pricing, for example, when it evaluates options for which way to go on things? There's a lot of things that are very relevant on climate change, and I don't have a problem with including that in an appropriate way in our work programme, because it will be part of the Mayor and the Board's work programme. On public health, I think we are in a situation in which the Mayor takes a great deal of interest in public health because it is his field of expertise. I think we might need to want to move beyond that and concentrate on the things that are within the purview of the Combined Authority. And one thing that is, and which has had very little discussion, is the recommendations of the Public Service Reform Commission, which was set up by the Combined Authority, which never had any online presence, never had any public consultation, was published some time ago to very little fanfare, and may well be worth us visiting, however briefly. And I think I would welcome an item on a future agenda, perhaps even part of the Mayor's question time, which said, right, OK, you've got these recommendations of the Public Service Reform Commission, which concentrated very much on health and care. How are you planning to deal with these? And was that something that was worth doing? And what difference will it make? Financial fairness, I agree, is a difficult subject to take on, and measuring compassion, I would have no idea where to start. However, these are the Mayor's suggestions and thoughts. We are in control of our own agenda, and we have our own business that we are entitled to put on our own agenda and carry out. Councillor van der Weyer has already mentioned already mentioned the local transport plan. I think there's affordable housing to consider. There's the whole active travel agenda. We were very much on the naughty step recently, where we were the only Combined Authority in the country to have our active travel funding held back. My understanding is that has now been resolved, but we want to make sure that that isn't going to be an ongoing issue, and we want to make sure, I think, that we're doing the right thing, and I would be very keen to have something on active travel here fairly soon, in which we could bring in the County Council, which delivers a lot of schemes, and also bring in officers of the Combined Authority to talk to us about active travel and how that works, and maybe even extend that more widely to the public and interested groups, cyclists, walkers and ramblers, disability organisations and so on, to have a really good conversation about active travel and how we can make that work. And then, of course, we've already previously mentioned at our last meeting, keeping our eye on the devolution deal commitments that were made and making sure that we are on track with those. So there's a lot of work that we can do which is under our own control, and I would like to propose that we do that. I'll come to Councillor Bagent in a second, but before I finish on that, and I did say I would take Councillor Sharp as well first. No, I've lost track of what I was going to say, so I'll go to Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly to try and answer Councillor Bagent's question. Well, it was a half-hour call we had with the Mayor, so it went relatively. The first time I've spoken to him, or not seen him in the flesh, but you know what I mean. We did spend a fair bit of time, I think, talking about the Mayor question time, which is the next item on our agenda. We probably spent half of that call just talking about his when he came up with these thoughts on that, and it did touch on active travel. So we didn't. We didn't really dig too deeply into what those four are, but obviously, slightly, I was surprised at the vagueness, for want of a better word, of those four items. And I think it's something we've got to go back on. But I'm without sort of going over what's been said, I think we need to set our own agenda. And I'm looking at we've spoken about the local transport plan, we've spoken about housing, we've spoken about skills, the devolution plan and goals, and the other one which I keep coming back to is still the outcome of the CAM, which we need to be scrutinised, because that's been stopped for 3 months, or 3 months ago, sorry, and there is some big financial implications which I think we as a body, as a board, just need to be asking the questions on. So I think going forward, I'm probably concurring with what you're saying. We need to set our own agenda on this.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Bagent, you circulated members this morning with some notes. I was wondering whether you were wanting to talk through that as well as what you were wanting to say in addition.
Okay, well, I'd like to come back on the previous thing, and I appreciate that 30 minutes, of which a lot of the time was taken up on other things. I mean, this is not telling us anything. Climate, as the Chair said, climate change is clearly a very wide remit, and one might have hoped that we could go back to the Mayor then to ask him how's he going to pad these four things out. If he wants us to scrutinise him on these four topics, then we need to have a bit more information of what he's actually talking about. It's sad that you only had a few minutes to actually discuss these, but this in its own self means very little. And I think I'd like to have some more information of what these four agendas that he's particularly interested in us scrutinising him on. So perhaps we could find some way of getting some padding for that, so that we actually might understand it. I'll pause there in case anybody...
I will ask anybody who has anything to say in response to that to come back, and then I will ask Councillor Bagent to talk through the notes that he has circulated prior to the meeting. Councillor Goldsack.
Point I was going to raise, hopefully you can hear me, is I think as an overview and scrutiny committee, we have given the Mayor the opportunity to tell us what he would like us to look at. He's left that so vague that we now set our agenda and allow him an opportunity in the future to come back and tell us, no, that's not what I wanted. Well, I'm sorry, you had your opportunity. We've had some great suggestions. We've had some really, really good suggestions as to what we should be looking at. Therefore, that's what I believe that we should take now. We cannot possibly measure the measure of compassion in the Mayor's policies. Let's put Afghanistan on the table. Where are we standing at that? So far shown zero compassion because it hasn't been mentioned. Come on, we can't do this. Rubbish, quite frankly, utter rubbish. Yeah, let's move forward with our own agenda and the good stuff that Councillor Bagent, Councillor van der Weyer and other members of this committee have said, let's go forward. Skills, housing, transport, travel, etc., etc. Let's move on.
Indeed. Councillor Corney.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Goldsack's just stolen my thunder. I think, in response to Councillor Basint's sort of last comments, I think, you're entirely right. I think that this is so woolly, but I think we've given him his opportunity, and this is what he's come back with. So I think, therefore, I'm pleased to hear that we're going to set our own agenda, and I think that's thoroughly the right thing to do, and we'll see where we end up with it. But I've just got a quick question. You have to excuse my ignorance maybe, but it says on the report that you actually met with the Mayor and his advisor. Is that advisor a CPCA employee, or is that just not really sure who that is? So it's just I'll say it might be an ignorant question, but
I think he's part of the mayoral office rather than employee of the Combined Authority as such, but I'm happy to ask Councillor Mr. Robert Parkin to clarify that.
Do you mean, was it Nigel?
Yes.
Yeah. So Nigel Pawley is an appointee within the mayoral office. He is an employee of the CPCA, and he was appointed in accordance with the element of the Constitution that deals with mayoral office appointments. But he's both. So he's in the mayoral office, and he's a policy advisor within that office.
I'm not sure whether that makes him the new Tom Hunt, but we shall see. Councillor Dew.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm following on from Councillor Bajan. I agree that you got some very high level but woolly comments there. I mean, I think we do need to move on and set our own agenda. And to be fair, the Mayor gets the opportunity when he comes to speak to us in November to pad out on those then if we haven't heard anything. So I agree totally with Councillor Goldsack. We get on with it, and then if the Mayor has things to say to us, when he comes for his question time, he's got the opportunity then to expand on that if he hasn't done in the meanwhile. Thank you.
I'm hearing a large measure of agreement. I don't think there's anybody that's said anything different from that around the table. Councillor Bajent.
Sorry. Whilst I understand the reasoning here, the opportunity to talk to the Mayor for 10 minutes on these issues didn't provide us with a satisfactory answer. I think that rather than setting our own agenda, we should go back to the Mayor and ask if he would like to give us a paragraph on each of these, or indeed meet again with the Chair and the Vice Chair to actually explain what is meant, because these are going to be the fundamental issues of the Mayor's time in office. Yeah, and I appreciate that compassion. My colleague over there doesn't quite understand what that means. I might understand that, but I think that we really do need to know what he's talking about when he says compassion. He stood on this agenda. The compassion in particular was one of his 3 C's. So he's been voted into office on this basis, and we might not think it's very objective, but it's a reality. That's what the people of Cambridgeshire, Peterborough and Cambridge City voted on. And without trying to make this overtly political, because I really hope that we can keep away from that, I really do. I think that just give him another chance. He's a new Mayor. Let's write to him, ask him to give us a paragraph on each, and then we can understand a bit more, rather than maybe going on the attack, which I don't think we really want to be doing either. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bajent. I don't... Councillor Davey, Councillor van der Weyer.
Yeah, not a million miles from Dave, but it goes back to my earlier point about the cogitating paper. Perhaps that could be used to try and explain more about what the Mayor's trying to get at with this, because I think there's one route we could go, and I get the impression, for example, with the transport plan, he's seeking for us to look at these 4 priorities and the transport plan together as an overview. But I don't know, and that's the problem I have. So it would be useful if the paper that's prepared seeks, as Dave has just said, seeks to explain what he's getting at. Although I have to say, some of the others are equally problematic. It's not just compassion that I think is problematic. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor van der Weyer.
Going back to him, it does seem like a good idea, but that doesn't prevent us from starting to establish our work programme, and just to sort of bring things together a little bit.
Totally, I agree with that. Councillor Dew.
Yeah, no, I was going to say what Councillor van der Weyer just said. I wasn't suggesting that we ignore the Mayor, but we've got a programme that we need to get on with apart from his areas he wants us to look at. We've identified our own that we want to look at, and I'm saying in the absence of the Mayor being clear on his, we get on with ours. If he can then come up with the information that Councillor Bagent and myself would like to see, then we can pick up on those items in due course. But I don't think we should stop doing our work programme in the meanwhile while we wait for him to catch up, and that's all I was trying to say. Thank you.
No, I agree. I think we're rapidly coming to the point where, you know, everything that needs to be said has been said, but not everybody has yet said it. So I think we are moving forward on that, and I'm quite happy to take back that action and work with officers on a letter to the Mayor that asks him to expand somewhat on his 4 suggestions, which are only suggestions. We have always been in charge of our own agenda. Can I come back to you, Councillor Bagent, because you did circulate us with a page of notes which I have been trying to get you for some time to expand upon, and I think now is your moment.
Right, okay, I'll take my moment. I'm not quite sure what this role entails, so I'm feeling my way. Everybody will appreciate that. So what I've done is I've highlighted things that are on the Mayor's agenda for the next up until 30th of March, which is quite sufficiently far forward. And I just wanted to highlight those things for my colleagues here to identify and point out the ones that I thought were specifically for transport. My friend on the right wants to talk a bit about Whittlesea, I think. So that will be something that I've highlighted in a way, because it doesn't seem to be mentioned, and I'm sure that he will want it mentioned. But my thoughts are that, and here I have to declare an interest, and this interest might actually preclude me from doing the role that I'm undertaking with this committee. I am a member of the Greater Cambridge Partnerships Board, so I'm one of the 3 voting members on that board. I represent Cambridge City on that. Now, that won't stop me talking at this committee, but it may, in fact, impact on the work that I do on behalf of this committee. I hope it doesn't, because I have an expertise and a real great interest in transport. I've been with the GCP for almost all the time it's been in existence. I've taken a couple of times out because I think you should take times out. But I'm really concerned. The Mayor's set himself a very tight agenda for this refresh of the transport plan, which I understand at this distance has come about because of the cancellation of CAM. So the transport plan needs to be refreshed. And I really would like us to talk with the Mayor, hold him to his timetable, because the GCP have a plan that is almost reliant on the Mayor having his plan in place. And we saw in previous times that GCP were held up on doing what they wanted to do because the then Mayor wanted to have an oversee, let's put it nicely, to oversee all of that. So in particular, the refreshment of the plan is seen to be coming up for committee decision in March on the Combined Authority Board, which would be perfect, because that will coincide with a part of the scheme of the Greater Cambridge Partnership, because at that time they would anticipate being into a consultation with the residents that they represent on the Cambridge City Centre plan. But it does require almost that the Mayor's plan is in place as well, because we don't want to get into one of these conflict positions. So I'd like us to be perhaps probing the Mayor a little bit about how big is his refresh actually going to be. Because if he's going back to square one, then he's never going to make March. And I hope that he understands that, and that the people advising him understand that. I also, in particular, would like to point, so that's one thing on the transport plan. I think that the item 13, e-scooters, I think this is something that probably every council is involved in, and it would be nice to see the Mayor issue something pretty quickly for consultation to see. I mean, maybe other places don't have them, but Cambridge City is now becoming scooter paradise.
I think you're the only authority that does actually, Councillor Bagent.
Yeah, is it?
It's
Right.
irrelevant to most of us.
We would want to have, I would think this committee would want to be scrutinising what the Mayor's doing, because it's a new, vibrant, modern method of transport, clearly better than motor cars, because it's non-polluting, clearly better than for people that are not so physically able to move about. It's not just a young person's thing, although right at this moment it does appear to be a bit that way. But I think this may be the transport for the future, or derivatives of scooters. You know, there may be, I myself have got an electric tricycle because I can't any longer physically ride a bike. And this sort of thing, this sort of strategy is going to become the 21st century for all of us. Cars, we understand by most people's agreement, it's time for them to move out of the way to make room for somebody else. So I point up to that. And there's other things on there. If people, I will follow up on anything that members ask me to follow up on directly myself, so I can report back to this committee on a regular basis and not at such great length. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bagent. That's extremely useful. My sense is that with so much on the transport agenda at the moment, it might be an idea to make that a focus of our next meeting in September, and to ask officers, not necessarily the Mayor, but the relevant officers, and the chair of the committee is the Mayor, so we maybe want to ask him after all, to invite them in to talk to us about those issues, because I think that there's so much and there's a lot of different things going on, so we might want to use this time to try and focus a bit on what particularly we're going to want to ask about. But in addition to the whole active travel thing, which I've mentioned, the local transport plan, you've mentioned here the key route network, which I profess not to understand, e-scooters, buses, railway, road changes. There's a lot on this list here, and that would make for a very substantial item, and for perhaps after that meeting next month for us to then to decide what we want to focus on further. We have the opportunity now to consider A, whether we want that to be the focus of our next meeting, and B, what in particular we want to talk about. But we also have three members, Councillors Bagent, Davey and Hay, who have stepped forward to take particular interest in particular parts of the transport agenda, and there might be an opportunity in the next month for those three members to get their heads together and work up some particular questions, depending on what we decide to do today. So do we want to make transport the focus of our next meeting, or a focus of our next meeting? Yes. Is there anything in particular on that list that you want us to prioritise, or do we just want to open up a general debate and set of questions before then deciding in September how to pursue those matters? Councillor Coles.
Chair, I think it's just a matter of process. I'm sure we've all got local issues that are relevant to Councillor Bagent's points here. Maybe if the three members who are going to be formulating together what sort of emphasis they want to put on that particular meeting, maybe if we just speak to them directly about local issues that we want to have included, that'll make sure that we cover any themes with a local flavour. But would that be a helpful suggestion? How do members feel about that? I'm reluctant for this to become a very hyper-local discussion, I have to say. Anything that involves a street name is probably too local. But because there are such big strategic issues going on here, would it be sensible, I'll come to you in a moment, Councillor Miss Scanlon, would it be sensible for us to ask members around this table to put their suggested questions to the three members, Councillors Bagent, Davey and Hay, in between meetings, so that 10 days ahead of the meeting we have a list of questions we can then circulate to officers. We ask the officer, Roland Potter I think, and the Mayor as chair of the committee to come to us next month and answer a set of questions and lines of questioning that we will have populated from your suggestions and put into themes, so that we can have a fairly structured discussion. And perhaps I can, along with your Vice Chair, have a discussion with those three members beforehand online as to how we structure and theme that event. Does that make sense? Are we happy with that? Okay,
thank you. That's good. Councillor Miscanlon, you wanted to come back.
Thank you. Number 82 on there is Fenland Station refuelling. What's refuelling?
I don't think it means refuelling, does it? I think it means
to give an update on the construction completion of March and Maney stations as part of the Fenland Station Regeneration Strategy Programme.
Yeah.
Whittlesea's not even mentioned, but there's supposed to be one moment it's on, one moment it's off. It's a vital infrastructure item within that rail network for March to Peterborough. All right, you can't go on it at the moment. It's it's curtailed because of a slight accident.
Yeah.
But it's vital for the future regeneration of the southern industrial estate in Whittlesea.
Yep.
And through to Peterborough. It is a vital link. That station has been promised to be upgraded, to the best of my knowledge, for 6 years. We need an answer on it.
Rather than have that debate now, that sounds like a question to be put to Councillors Bagent, Davey and Hay to be included in the mix for a discussion next month. You were just saving yourself an email, were you, Councillor Miscanlon? I'm not surprised given the state of broadband in the Fens, but but there we are. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to suggest for next month was that at the September meeting of the Housing Committee, there is going to be a paper, which we have none of us yet seen, on principles for what I assume to be affordable housing. I wondered whether, given Robert Fox's very helpful offer of a template for putting forward suggestions for scrutiny, whether Councillor van der Weyer, as our housing supremo, might want to trial that and put something together which he could then circulate in advance of the meeting, and we could ask someone to come in, the appropriate officer to come in and talk to us about principles for housing in the light of the discussion that will then have happened at the Housing Committee. So we can kick off a line of inquiry about affordable housing and the way that's going to go forward now that we're seeing the ending of the 100k homes scheme. We're seeing the what happened earlier in the year about the holding back of the money for the original scheme, and where the mayor and the board are going to go next with that. So that's 2 items of business for the next meeting. Are you happy with those? And Councillor van der Weyer, are you happy to trial that template just to see how it works on something which is broadly a kind of a one-off, and then we can come back to have a discussion about the template next month in the knowledge of and being able to see how it's being used in practice. Yeah. Okay. Was there anything else we wanted to cover under our work programme? Councillor Goldsack.
Just one point, Chair,
Yeah.
and it's just to make sure I've got the process right. I'm very, very keen for us to discuss at the next meeting where we're at with the CAM, what the ongoing costs are with the CAM on the decisions. I'm assuming we're into discussions as an authority here for payments for people to leave, etc., etc. There's an awful lot of this that I think needs scrutiny. Now, is part of the process here, is that me asking for it on, or do you want me to email the 3 representatives to say this needs to be on?
It seems to me, I was assuming that CAM would be a fundamental part of the lines of questioning for next month, so I think that needs to be very much on there. Yeah. There will be a paper going to the board at the end of next month on the CAM. Councillor Davey is our CAM person.
Yeah, I had assumed that it would be, but Mark, it would be helpful if you put down what your concerns are. If you drop me a line, then presumably I would have thought that the CAM stuff would fall to me rather than Anne or Dave, so if that makes sense. So, but please drop me a line, because then I can make sure I'm representing what you want.
Very much so, yes. Okay, then we don't seem to have a meeting in October in the schedule. Is that an oversight? Do we need a meeting in October? If we had a meeting in October, what would it be for?
Chair?
Mm-hmm.
Does that not depend upon some of the discussions that are about to be had?
So we're thinking about using the September date to decide whether to have an October date?
Well, no, I think more about what comes out of the papers that we've already agreed to do just now. Might
I just wanted
illuminate.
to alert to the fact that there is an October...
Yeah, provisional date. Alex has just suggested a provisional date, if that helps.
I'm sorry? Normally it would be on Monday the 25th of October, if we were, because it would be 2 days before the board. There is a board meeting on the 27th of October. I think it would make... I think we should be penciling that in at least as a reserve date. We may decide we don't need it, but in view of what we're about to kick off with quite a lot of subjects, actually, and there may well be a more specific piece of work arising out of the discussion we have next month anyway on transport in general that might make an October meeting sensible to have. So I'm also... We don't have a meeting yet in December either. There isn't a board meeting in the agenda either for December, but I don't think we have to make that decision yet, but I'd like us to pencil in that 25th of October meeting. Councillor Goldsack.
Quickly check the diary, it's in. We have a reserve date in for the 25th.
It's not on the... when I checked the website, the Combined Authority website this morning, it wasn't there.
Okay, the only way I've got in my diary is to accept an invite. So
right, okay. It may be that
must
an
have come
invitation has been circulated, but it's not been put in the public-facing diary.
I think, Chair, as it's a reserve date, it probably does not appear on the Combined Authority meetings website as yet.
Right.
But that could
I think it should.
be changed.
I think it should, and I think if we have reserve dates, they ought to be in the public-facing diary. I don't see any insuperable difficulty with that, so can we make sure that that happens? Okay, excellent. So are we comfortable now with the decisions that we've made here? Have you got notes that you can... Copious notes, indeed.
I'm following the Mayor's 4 Cs, copious and cogitating. Two more.
No, you only had 3 Cs, mercifully, so as long as you come up with one more by the end of the meeting, we shall be...
Those are your 3 Cs, Mr. Fox, not the Mayor's.
No, indeed. Okay, so we know what we're doing next month. We know that we are writing to the Mayor to ask for more detail about the 4 topics that he raised in his discussions with Councillor Sharp and myself. So are we comfortable with the outcome of that discussion? Oh, and we're going to ask Councillor van der Weyer to trial the template, and we are going to task Councillors Bagent, Davey and Hay with collating questions from us to be emailed to him, along with the question that Councillor Miscandlin decided not to email. Okay, thank you very much. Can we move then on to item 7, which is, I think, headlined item 6 in the agenda, which is Mayor's Question Time format proposal. So, Robert, do you have anything to say to us before we start in on this? I think it's fairly self-evident.
As you say, self-evident. Again, following on from your discussions yourself and Councillor Sharp had with the Mayor on the 4th of August, and the potential formats for said mayoral question time.
Yep. Okay. So Councillor Coles, I saw first, and Councillor Coles and Councillor van der Weyer.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions. If the Mayor wants to hold a public meeting, there's nothing stopping him, and why that would be part of the committee's business, I'm somewhat confused. It's very easy for the Mayor to hold a public meeting with people if he wishes, wherever he wishes to do so, and I look forward to that opportunity. But when it comes to this committee, we need to have regular appearances so that we can challenge where necessary and give praise where it's due. One a year simply isn't sufficient, and we did try to get quarterly meetings before. I wish we could aim for that with the current Mayor so that we at least are able to have regular meetings. Bearing in mind we have the authority under the Constitution to call the Mayor to attend at any stage. I would, however, like to establish the fact that the Mayor is here to service this committee, and this committee to carry out its duties should be able to have that level of access. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I agree with that. Councillor van der Waal.
Thank you. So the purpose of this mayoral question time, I think, is to try and establish a dialogue between this committee and the mayor to understand what the mayor's objectives are, what he's doing to meet them. And to allow us to, as Councillor Cole said, to challenge them on these things. I think the proposed format isn't going to achieve that for a variety of reasons. It's not frequent enough, an hour wouldn't be enough time to really get into any depth. And also this idea of having pre-submitted questions with only one follow-up, I don't think is going to get really into the meat of any particular topic, get any sort of real dialogue going. We have that format, for example, at council meetings frequently, and we all know that it can achieve some things, but often isn't really that productive. I think we're trying to explore some other formats. For example, I mean, obviously, we want the question time to be focused and not sort of too scattergun. So some sort of agreement in advance about the topics that we decide, I think, would be beneficial. So that's in there. But there needs to be some ability to have some dialogue. So whether you have a certain amount of time for any given topic where members can ask questions, and there is a sort of bit of back and forth, I think would be good. Possibly a little bit more time and more frequently. Whether we can achieve quarterly, that would be ideal. But an hour and a half, 3 or 4 times a year, I think seems. I think isn't too much to ask. In London, I believe it's 10 times a year they have mayoral question time, and without questions in advance. So I think that we can do an awful lot better than this.
Councillor Bagent.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I agree. I think that we do want a great deal more access to the mayor than once a year. I wondered, when you met with him, you said, I think, that you spent 10 minutes talking about this. What was his reasoning in that regard, to only have the one meeting?
He was busy, I think, wasn't it, fundamentally, Councillor?
Yes, but he did come back when we sort of challenged him that in terms of once a year to the committee. He then did add, and I forget the exact words he used, that that didn't include visits to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. So we thought, certainly he made a comment now that the paper doesn't actually really say that at all, is that visits to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee would be in addition to this mayoral question time. But he's not elaborated on that, I notice, in the paper.
The last bullet point on page 19 does say the mayor and other members of the CA board could be requested to attend any of the committee meetings to respond to questions about actions of the CA board. Yeah. So I think that's where that has picked that up. But I entirely agree with those who've said that once a year is insufficient. Councillor Fane and then Councillor Dew.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder whether the mayor actually has this question time in mind as being anything to do with the scrutiny committee, because if the mayor is going to have a question time, it makes sense for that to be opened far beyond this committee to deal quite widely, and I think we should focus our response on the mayor's appearances before this committee, which is what needs to be regular, and leave the mayoral question time as an additional thing which he may want to pursue himself separately.
I think, to be clear, the paper does say that the mayor's question time to be held twice a year. This is about a third of the way down page 19. The first session is mayor's question time with the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. The second session is mayor's question time with members of the public. Now, that second point does not concern us. It's none of our business. So we are talking about that first session, which is the session with the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. That's what we're focusing on. And I'm hearing round the table that once a year is insufficient for that, even if we take into account calling on him to come and appear before us on other matters. That's what I'm taking away. Councillor Dew was next, and then Councillor Davey.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. You more or less said what I was going to say. The fact that once a year is not enough. All of my colleagues have around the table have agreed on that. You know, we think quarterly or more often is suitable. I think the opportunity to put questions in advance means we can come along with prepared answers rather than I haven't got them available to you today, members. I'll come back another time, which is always unsatisfactory way of doing it. I do agree with my colleagues that if you start limiting the follow-up questions, if I ask a question and I've got a follow-up, what happens if the other colleagues around the table pull other things out from it? We need to leave an open format on that. And I think we mustn't rely on the fact that we can, call the mayor to any meeting we want whenever we want. There needs to be a regular system in there that's in his diary so that we build this regular dialogue, because if we're actively going to work with him in driving his projects forward in a way that we think are, sustainable and acceptable, we need to have that good two-way flow of information. So I think what you said, Chairman's bang on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Davey.
I suppose my question or my concern would be that the mayor might see the question time or the role of scrutiny as a challenge rather than a working with, and the flavour of this makes me feel that he sees it as potentially sees it as challenge rather than what I understand scrutiny to be is about how we work with him to find ways of working and bringing projects together in a more improved and enhanced way. That does include some challenge, but it also might include support and development. And I suppose my question is, in your discussions with him, how did he perceive scrutiny to operate, or didn't you get that time to understand that?
I don't think we had much of a sense of that, and I'm not sure that he was entirely clear about that either, to be fair.
Okay.
But, yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Nawaz and then Councillor Goldsack.
Thank you, Chair. I think one of the main roles we have as a committee is to hold the Mayor to account. So I don't think the Mayor should be afraid of being challenged. And I don't think he is, by the way. And I think the general consensus here today is that he needs to appear before the committee more regularly. So I think, Chair, perhaps you and the Vice Chair could make an approach and request a quarterly meeting. I think that would be very useful.
Does quarterly meeting sound about right, or is that too frequent? 3 times a year rather than 4, or are we saying quarterly? I'll come to Councillor Goldsack, and then I've seen Councillor Miscandlin, Councillor Sharp, and was that Councillor Corney as well? Right, okay. Thank you. Councillor Goldsack.
There's a very quick thing following on from Mike Davies' point, really. First and foremost, quarterly, that's that one. The second thing here is, I have a feeling, and we're all working on supposition here because we haven't got enough to go on, okay? But my feeling here is that he may be getting this committee confused with audit committee, which Mike and I sat on last year at CBCA, where the mayor did come once a year. Right, so we need to get this clarified, don't we? And we need to. I totally endorse also the point that Mike said. Yes, we are here to challenge, but in a positive way to get a better outcome for the people of Cambridge and Peterborough. That's our role, isn't it?
Okay, and I'm trying to remember where I went next. Sorry, I had all in my head and I didn't write them down. It was Councillor Miscandlin, then Councillor Sharp, then Councillor Corney.
Thank you. I think one of the things that the Mayor maybe not understand completely about ONS, it's a critical friend. We're here to criticise and to be friendly. We're not here to challenge him. We're not here to put him down or rake him over the coals. We are here as a critical friend. And I think he needs to understand that. And maybe he'll be not so afraid to come before us because we're not here to rip him apart or bury him for any unknown stories.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. I think, yes, I mean, I agree with virtually everything that's been said. We don't know enough about the priorities of the Mayor and the detail, as we said on the previous item. The mayoral question time, yes, London do this session basically once a month. And trawling, when I was looking through the various websites of the combined authorities, Andy Street in West Midlands does a mayor's question time 2 or 3 times a year. So I think that's where maybe the idea has come from. But I think if we go, picking up the point earlier, if we go for quarterly meetings and maybe settle for every 4 months, but certainly try to aim to get quarterly, then I think that's really what we should be aiming at. And as been said, we try to submit questions in advance, because that way the detail is then available, and they can't, the answer can't be ducked, or I don't have that information to hand, I'll give you a written response. But similarly, limiting follow-up questions, I think, is very not a good practice, because an answer quite often leads to another question, and we're here to try to scrutinise and be the critical friend, as been said. So, I think we should aim for quarterly, personally.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Corney.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The critical friend thing was, I was going to bring it up, it's been said now, but I think, it's quite important to highlight as well, though, that we established early on that we have the power, as Robert explained to us, to pull the mayor in front of us. And I think if he's not going to turn up quarterly, that's the route we're going to end up taking, and it's only going to cause friction. It's not going to be healthy or helpful. So I think, the quarterly minimum, I think, and if hopefully there'll be that feel of working together, and he'll turn up when we need him anyway. But let's work on a quarterly at least.
Okay, thank you very much. The format suggested to us covers a number of issues. There's the frequency, which we've discussed at some length. There's the duration, which I think it's been suggested that an hour is not long enough. Do we have an agreed view on that, or are we happy with an hour? I'm a bit worried about an hour with lots of unplanned supplementaries, is my concern, because if we've got when we may well have 6 or 7 areas we want to talk about, that's 10 minutes an area. That gets used up very, very quickly. Councillor Corney.
Our meetings very rarely go on for more than 2 hours, do they? I mean, do we need to put a time limit on this? If it's a particularly heavy meeting and it's an important meeting, you'd like to think he'd do the respect to answer the questions that are there and see the meeting through like we all do. I don't know. Does it need to? Do we need to put a time limit to it?
Right. Okay, Councillor Davey.
I think it oddly enough goes back to the first question. If we're having 4 a year, which would be my preferred option, and if you then theme each one would be about housing, one would be about transport, one would be about skills, and one would be general, then we can actually properly look at the subject concern, properly offer critical friendship, properly offer support if required, and that would then mean that you'd be able to do the job properly. He'd get a benefit out of it, and so would we, representing our individual areas. And so if it was once a year for an hour, I think that would just be all that would end up doing is alienating the group. So it's about, I think, talking to him again about what might be in his interests, even though he may not feel that at the moment. And I think that would be the kind of approach I would suggest we might want to take forward, because then we can do it properly. Thank you.
I tend to agree. And then there's the issues about submission of questions in advance, which seems reasonable, and the question about supplementaries. Do we want lots of supplementaries, or are we happy just to have a one supplementary rule? Councillor Hay.
I think limiting it to one supplementary to be totally wrong, because dependent on the answers that we get back, that could lend itself to further questioning that we might want to do. And if you're only allowed one supplementary, it would cut off that dialogue.
Yeah, it's balancing that against the time we have available on what we want to cover. Councillor van der Weyer.
Yeah, there's got to be some way of limiting it. You could have some time limits, or one supplementary, and then a couple of other councillors can have supplementaries or something like that. I mean, the objective is to get a bit more of a discussion, get more in depth, and so you can, rather than just be batted back once.
Okay, Councillor Fane, Councillor Coles.
Yes, you're right, Chair. It has to be a matter of balance, but I think it's important that the Chair, that you as Chair, should have some discretion. If it is clear that an answer which has been given, perhaps an answer to a supplementary question, opens a whole lot of new issues and there are people around the room wanting to ask them, then it's important that you have the discretion to call on additional people.
Okay, Thank you. Councillor Coles.
Ditto.
Okay. Oh, thank you for your brevity. Spot on. Okay, so we are suggesting, therefore, that we strike that one supplementary follow-up question would be permitted from the proposal, yeah? So we are now looking at seeking a quarterly meeting with the Mayor, in which case an hour, provided it was themed, would be sufficient, and to remove the requirement for one supplementary only. On that basis, is that what you are happy for us to take back out of this discussion? Grant. Okay. I think we've done that then. Thank you very much. And then we move on to item 8, which is the Combined Authority Board agenda. Now, as I think I have already mentioned, I'm particularly concerned that we should ask some questions about the item on the board agenda under the general exception notice relating to the option to either dispose of a building to an outside body or to acquire the freehold as a combined authority for the authority's own use. I firmly believe we should be asking some questions about this because it hasn't been signalled within the required 28 days, but also because it raises a whole host of issues about the combined authorities accommodation strategy or lack of it, its rationale for going down that route, its the basis for its choice, if it was a choice, of Alconbury as a location for office space for the combined authority, or is it just because the building happened to be there? The public transport issues, which we are told was one of the reasons for the previous mayor deciding to terminate the lease at Alconbury, that on the previous building, the costs associated with that and the financial outturn to the authority associated with surrender of that lease. All of those, it seems to me, are questions that we should be asking on a paper that has been very much put forward at the very last minute. Do people have views about that as a suggestion? Councillor van der Weyer.
That's excellent. You've captured, I think, some of the issues with this very well, and I would entirely support you raising this at the board.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Are people content? Councillor Goldsack.
Yeah, I would agree. I think you've handled that and captured everything that we're saying in there. I think the only other follow-up with this, and I'm going to have a little tongue-in-cheek, as compassionately as you can ask it, which is this going to be the modus of operandi moving forward? Because to get 4 main points on an agenda and 3 of them to be emergencies is, quite frankly, not very compassionate.
Yeah, thank you. Does anybody disagree with our putting together a question in that form for the Combined Authority Board on Wednesday? If not, then I shall work with officers to get that written up in that form. Robert has been taking copious notes. Was copiousness already one of your 3 C's? It was. Yes, yes. So we're being doubly copious, yes. You don't have very long to come up with that 3rd C. Right, okay, thank you very much. I think that's probably it in terms of the board agenda, unless there's anything that anybody else believes we should be asking questions about. I'm not seeing any. Okay, so Combined Authority Forward Plan. We have seen that. Do any of our lead members, rapporteurs, etc., have anything? Councillor Bagent has already supplied us with a list of the, he's picked out the issues out of the forward plan that relates to his area. Is there anything that anybody else would like to say about their particular area that they've taken responsibility for? Councillor Coles.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to skills, there are 6 due for the Skills Committee. I shall be following up because clearly nothing's been published yet. So I think I'll take that up with John T. Hill directly and see what else I can find, and also with Councillor Netzinger, who's the lead member on the board. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Anybody else got anything on the forward plan? No? Okay, thank you very much indeed. The date of our next meeting then is Monday the 27th of September at 11 a.m. at Fenland District Council. And the usual
Chair, forgive me
pre-meeting. Councillor Davey.
Yeah, I was going to raise locations, if it hasn't been already discussed elsewhere, if it's appropriate or inappropriate.
Okay, we had a brief informal discussion earlier.
Oh, right, okay.
But,
do you want to do this off?
No, by all means, say what you...
If we're going to have places to go to that are to be, I suppose, viable by public transport, it's then a bit strange to then have to get a taxi from the station to the place we're having a meet, i.e. today. I know we've had a strange journey, Dave and I, but nonetheless, it seems an odd decision. It's a bit like having a meeting 2 miles from where the station is. Can I suggest, subject of course to the committee, March is a fantastic location if Fenland District Council are prepared to host us, because it's a 2-minute walk from the station and it's central location in the county.
That is indeed the location of our next meeting.
I know. I think I was hinting that maybe it should be a permanent
location. Oh, there's controversial. Does anybody have any, before I close the meeting, we are still on date of next meeting, I think, tangentially. Does anybody have a view on other locations and whether we want to ask for a permanent location that is not all Alconbury-wheeled?
Just briefly, Chair, I know we don't have any members of the public here, but we are supposed to be open to the public. I appreciate some are online. If we start going to one location only, then how do those others get there?
That is a fair point. Any other contributions to this? Councillor Hay and then Councillor Miscanlon.
I think if we restrict it to one location, it's too much of a burden for that particular district council.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Miscanlon.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I agree with what Councillor Hayes just said. This is not the most ideal places. We've got like a railway line going through the far end of this being disturbed. It's not ideal. Other locations are better, but having a permanent base, no, I don't agree having a permanent base. I agree with Councillor Davies that Fenland is beautiful. It's 2 minutes from the railway station when you can get a train. But no, I think we are a combined authority for the complete area, and we should travel around the area. All right, some of the accommodation isn't always the best, but I think we have to look at, and Ely is particularly one that's not very good for it, is parking. Having restricted parking spaces within the town is a little bit difficult, but we need to have these pointed out to us where we can park for up to 3 hours plus, so that we aren't going to pick up a fine for parking in the wrong place at the wrong time for the wrong length of time. So I think that needs to be highlighted to us that we can do that.
All right, okay, thank you. Councillor Davey, then Councillor Bagent.
Well, all I was going to say was the cost of parking, and this is my own beautiful authority, Cambridge, probably that alone will take up a certain amount of budget, that just by paying Fenland District Council the appropriate amount per year would probably save time and money in the long term.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bagent.
Chair, as one who really believes that we should be travelling by active travel when we can, I think that I'm surprised that we are concerned about parking. Our main concern should be, can we get there by public transport? No. And if we can't, then I suggest that we seriously consider whether that venue is appropriate. We are involved in the beginning of a rush towards preventing climate change. We will be adopting policies. The County Council have. The City Council has. I'm not absolutely certain about Peterborough. We have adopted policies for a climate emergency. I know as yet this combined authority hasn't, and one would hope that it will do shortly. But parking should not be our consideration. Our consideration should be, can we get there by active travel, bus or train?
Right, okay, thank you. Councillor Dew.
Yeah. That's fine, and I agree with these high-level aspirations. But when you live 7 miles from a railway station, you have one bus on a Friday and one bus on a Monday. I'm not sure how I'd get anywhere without actually having some form of. I think part of the thing that we're doing on this authority is trying to sort out things like the bus routes, and they'll follow on. So I think it's it's where we should aspire to be in the long run. But the reality is it's not where we are at the moment. I think as long as it's accessible to the majority of us, I think it's fine at the minute. I mean, all of them, to a degree, are accessible by train or bus at the moment from the main centres. It's when you get off the beaten track that you're slightly away from it. I mean, as long as there's some form of parking, for those who have to travel by car, then so be it. But I do accept that, other ways would be great. I mean, it's like with March. I'd quite happily travel from where I am to March, and it takes me 20 minutes in the car or 3 hours on the train. I don't mind which I do. So we've got to get those things right. But I agree with the high-level aspirations. But I think, moving around the districts at the moment and the towns, cities rather, is probably the way to go, because we are scrutinising on behalf of the whole area. So I think it's fair that we be seen to move around, unless someone decides in the future, if we do have a permanent headquarters, not necessarily at Alconbury as we're looking at, but somewhere else. It might be that all our meetings take place in one place beyond our control. But I think at the minute, aspire to public transport where we can. But the reality is, provide for those who can't. Thank you.
Well, okay, thank you. So we've had a suggestion that we have a permanent base at Fenland, and Fenland has told us they don't love us enough for that. So we're not going to proceed on that basis. So we are going to be peripatetic. The question then is: are there any of these venues that you would want to strike off? I think if we're talking about connectivity and public transport, I don't see South Cambridgeshire as being viable, because it's only accessible by public transport from Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire. That seems to me, if we're trying to offer public transport as an option, to be an unsustainable venue. Are you happy for us to strike that off, or do you want us to retain the option to meet at South Cambridgeshire? Those in favour of wishing to retain the option of continuing to meet in South Cambridgeshire occasionally. Those against? You're for. Those against? Supreme indifference. So, Robert Parkin.
I'm just sitting next to colleagues who worked really hard to find venues. I think we'd be honest and open with you, it's been a real challenge. Lots of venues have been closed. As being assessed by whoever's running them that they're not able to comply with public health guidance. And of course sometimes we face other issues. We want to provide audio-visual so that our activities can be broadcast and easily accessible by members of the public. So it was just a little comment there. It is a challenge. Obviously, we'll work very hard to get preferred venues and to take those points on, but sometimes there may be some element of compromise just based on availability.
I think that's right, and nobody would want to minimise the work that's been done to put this list together. I think my question is whether there are any of those few that we would want to strike out and concentrate on having more frequent meetings at the others on a more frequent basis. Councillor Miscanlon.
Cambridge City in the Guildhall. For me to get there, I normally would have driven to Milton and got the bus in, but they've cancelled the buses. So now I'd have to drive to St Ives and come in that way. So it's probably the worst to try and get to from anywhere, or pay an exorbitant amount of car parking charges in Cambridge city centre. It's not the easiest to get to. I would quite happily see it disappear.
Right, okay. Was that a hand, Councillor Hay?
My understanding is Milton has reopened.
Yeah, that was my understanding as well. Yeah. A little while ago, yes. Councillor Bajent.
I'd be reluctant to see Cambridge City disappear, Chair. And you can convert that into whatever meaning that you might want to make.
Well, right, okay, Councillor Corney.
I just think we can go round and round and round for the rest of the afternoon, if you like. I just, look, we've all got a sub. If one of us, if a venue doesn't suit one of us, That's down to us to have a chat with our sub, isn't it? And I think we should just go on with what we're doing at the moment and let the officers find a suitable venue, and let's all, it's not for long, is it? It's not for we're not doing it daily. Let's just be serious about it and just carry on as we are.
Well, nobody has. We have not as yet made any decision to strike any venue from the list, because the one vote I did take was carried by the one vote to a forest of abstentions. So, okay, let's proceed on the basis of this list. However, just before people start to drift off, as they need to do, I have been reminded that we had an informal discussion about whether we might want to do the pre-meet that we have by Zoom a few days beforehand, rather than come here or wherever at 10 o'clock. Does that work as a suggestion for people? It might make transport slightly easier. We could do it on the Friday by Zoom before the Monday, and therefore not have to set out extra early or face perhaps some of the obstacles we have. What do people feel about that?
We won't have seen we'll have seen the board agenda for less time, obviously, but that's less important for the way we're working. But
we'll have seen it for a couple of days, though, yes, and we're trying to not focus so much on immediate responses to the board. Councillor Corney?
Yeah, thank you again. Sorry to go on, but I think it's just breaking into another day. I think it's I run my own business, and I think I accept this is the position I'm taking on and the role. I accept that I'm going to lose at least half a day. You go into suddenly you're breaking into another working day for it's
right. Okay, fair point, Councillor Dew.
Yeah, no, almost exactly the same position. I'm fortunate that my employer thinks that doing public service is something they should be supporting, but there's only so far you can stretch them. If you suddenly say you're going to have another bit, I've got to come here this morning anyway, so my morning has gone, so I might as well be here an hour earlier and have the pre-meet, so I'm more than content with how we do it. Okay. And I haven't yet had a pre-meet where we've got 10 minutes for... We've had a few where I thought, well, that was a waste of 45 minutes where we didn't use, because we only used 15 minutes, but I've never actually thought it was a waste of having the pre-meet immediately beforehand, so I'd be happy to continue as it is.
Okay, that's fine. Are people, I'm not seeing any other hands, people generally in agreement we want to continue as we have been and have the 10 a.m. pre-meet in person at the venue for the 11 o'clock meeting? Yep. Okay, fabulous. In that case, thank you all for your attendance and for your contributions. Thank you to officers for your support, and see you all in due course.